Um, I went really fast yesterday. I mean, I did take the time to note everything on a chalkboard and to be mindful about it all day, but I was really quick about sharing it. And today, I really need to tell the story about Father Robert Roser. Father Bob was my childhood priest when I grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee. We moved there in 1980, and we attended Immaculate Conception Catholic Church. So Father Bob was the guy on Friday nights. My parents would be downtown at a place called Joe B's, and they'd be having a cocktail on a Friday night, and I would go meet them. And you know, it wasn't unusual to see Father Bob up there as well, typically with a scotch. But when I was a student at Austin Peay State University in March of 1987, my second quarter of college, I had graduated in the top 10 in my high school class. I had a full academic ride, and I was in the honors program. And in March of 1987, 3 baseball players decided that they needed to do some really godforsaken things to me. So they were charged with rape. It was never prosecuted for a lot of reasons, but that's not the important part of this story, so we're not going to really go down that rabbit hole right now. I'm just going to say Father Bob was important to me, and I loved him dearly. Then I moved to Nashville, and for a good 7 years, between 1987 and 1994, I was not in church unless it was for a funeral, a wedding, maybe Christmas Eve or possibly Easter. But as a general rule, I was not in church. And I call it a season of separation. It was a big season of separation for me. But I was going through, I guess what any 19-year-old girl would go through, being raped and having the entire town know, and all of the drama that ensued, you know. But in 1995, I was living on Blair Boulevard in Nashville. And at that point, I was already really in a very much in a season of healing. And every Friday night, I was taking calls for the Rape and Sexual Abuse Center. It was known as RSAC back then, Take Back the Night for rape victims. And I was just very into volunteering and helping wherever I could. And so on Friday nights, I would take the calls. And for 24 hours, when you hear enough young children tell you what has happened to them, it's very humbling, and you realize that what happened to you may have been godforsaken and terrible, but you find this little bit of gratitude that it wasn't that, you know? There, but for the grace of God, so go I, or whatever. So August of 95, I was taking the calls on Friday nights and then going out on Saturday nights, typically with friends or whoever. And I will just state it because it's fact, is that I was drinking entirely too much alcohol in this season of my life. And I think I actually drank more that particular season because everything that I was absorbing from those calls on Friday nights. Not blame, I'm recognizing when in the past I would drink too much, it was because I was really desperately trying to avoid thinking about something. So it's just an admission, nothing else. August 13th, I woke up, 1995, completely hungover, probably still partially drunk. I mean, if I'm being really, really honest about that, I'm probably still a little bit drunk. But I woke up and I had a compulsion to go to church. I mean, like out of nowhere, hadn't thought about it, hadn't considered it, wasn't even on my radar. Boom, you got to go to church. Not think about going or maybe consider going or, hey, wouldn't it be nice to think about this? But it was you're going to get up and you're going to go to church. And the closest church to my apartment happened to be a Catholic church. It was called Christ the King. And so I looked it up in the phone book. I double checked the times and made sure I was there. I walk into the church and I remember distinctly how cold it felt. It was August. It was not temperature cold. It just felt cold. I kneeled, made the sign of the cross, took my seat in the pew, about 2/3 back and on the right. I can see exactly where I sat, and I remember the feeling. I kneeled down and I was praying, and I sit back up on the pew and I open up the bulletin. I reacquaint myself with Mass on the left, and as I look over to the right, it tells me that Father Robert Roser had died August 12th, 1995. Hadn't been sick. He died from an aneurysm, a sudden aneurysm, as he was preparing his sermon for August the 13th. I wished I remembered what the sermon was that day, and I am asking them, the folks at Christ the King are trying to find an old bulletin to see what the sermon was, to see if they have a record of it. But again, this is going back a long way, and Father Mallett's not even at Christ the King anymore. But what's interesting to me is that the very first time I'm back in church to seek God, I find out my childhood priest, who I had drank with at a bar and who knew all the things, that he had died. And what's interesting now is to look back and realize that once that happened, some other doors opened and some things panned out. By the following summer, by the summer of '96, I was at my 10-year high school reunion, and quite jovial and very pleased and very happy. And there's some beautiful pictures from that. And that's where I got together with the father of my children. So in a roundabout, convoluted way, because God got me up in August of 1995 to get to church, I was either there August 13th, the day after Father Bob died. That's what I think it was. But the very next Sunday would have been August 20th. And that's the date my dad died. Not the same year, but my dad died 14 years ago on August 20th. So I'm just realizing all of these things are kind of working together. But I just think it's really cool that God got me back into his house in the most strangest of circumstances, in a season where I was not seeking him. And he literally pulled me from the bed and got me to the church on time. Now, Robert Roser was my priest. Robert Riggs was the president of the university. I used to take care of his kids. On the weekends, he would have to go out of town with his wife, Board of Regents things or whatnot. And when the rape happened, he was quoted in the newspaper as saying, that they were concerned for the young woman or something to that effect. But basically just a sympathetic comment for any victim, really. But he knew me personally, And apparently what I learned a few months after that, and I don't want to say his name because he is still teaching at the university, but I ran into him at a grocery store in Clarksville the fall of 1987. And he told me that President Riggs lost his job for defending me in any way. Something behind closed doors, and he was defending me, and apparently he lost his job. I know he went on to write a couple of books, several books, and I know he addressed campus rapes and so forth in them. I don't have to go on about that. I lived it. But it is fascinating to me that all of these things are interwoven. I wouldn't have my kids today if God hadn't got me back to church. And for that, I am grateful. I hope y'all have a blessed day.